Hi there, welcome back. So this is part 2 of the height control valve rebuild. Part 1, I got a genuine valve that I'd already actually dismantled and taken all the seals out, but I just showed you how it comes apart. And this part, what I'm going to do is put it back together again. I've got a seal kit, I've got a new shaft, and we've got new bushes. I'm just going to talk about how it goes back together and what things you need to look out for when you're building it. So we'll talk about the half with the cam in it first, with the shaft. Now inside here you can see the it's actually got nylon bushes. Now originally these had brass bushes pressed in, the early ones, and I think there was a mod from Rolls-Royce where they changed it. It's not nylon, it's a different material, but call it nylon because I can't remember what that material is. But now, so I think they used to squeak when they had brass bushes. So yeah, Rolls-Royce changed them for the nylon type. They come like, this is what the bushes are like when you order them. Now, the reason why it's important to change the bushes is because the shaft that sits inside the bushes has a gland seal that goes between it and the housing. Okay, and see there's like an aperture around the shaft, and you have this seal that sits either side of the shaft. It's like I think it's a H section they call it, but it's a gland that you have to squeeze in between the shaft and the housing. And what happens if the bushes wear is that means that the shaft can move up and down or left and right and cause the gland to gape, and that's where you're going to start leaking. So if your bushes wear out, it's going to cause it to leak. So if you do rebuild your height control valve, it's important that you change the bushes if they need to be. They're relatively easy to press out. You just push them out. You can push them out from the other side. As you put a screwdriver or something through here, be careful not to mar up the inside of the valve there, and you can push them out, and then you just have to make a drift. You just have a tool that pushes that bush into the hole. And then an important thing that you have to do when you fit new bushes, you can see on these ones there is a slot cut into it. Now the reason for that is, although this chamber is the low pressure return chamber and it doesn't have a build-up of pressure in there, what you have is you have pulsing. So as the height control valve, as the ram depressurizes and the fluid pulses through the return chamber, you can get this kind of pulse of pressure that comes through this side. Now, if you don't have a slot cut in the bush, then what can happen is it can actually force the bush out. So it forces the bush out and forces it against that gland, and that gland then gets pushed against the plate, and that is another way that you can obviously damage those glands and it will start leaking. So there is a bulletin about the slot that you cut, but basically, I mean, these slots look rather wide compared to what is described in the bulletin. I have read the bulletin some time ago, and it tells the technician to take a hacksaw blade and cut a slot to a certain depth in that bush. And what that does is it allows the pressure to equalize around the bush. So although the gland is in there on the other side, and that gland is still going to feel the pressure from inside that chamber, the bush is going to have an equal pressure either side of it, and it's not going to push the bush out against the gland. So that when you install the bushes, you'll need to cut the slot, and you're also going to need to ream them out to match the shaft. Now I've got a new shaft here. This is a Prestige Parts shaft. The old one, okay, so this was an original. This came out of a brand new original height control valve, and you can see that it's, I mean, this is not pitted or anything. This would probably clean up and take a seal, but it's rarely do you open up a height control valve and find that the shafts aren't pitted and are likely to take a new seal. So we'll fit a new shaft. This one I haven't got the new bushes in, I haven't taken them out and fitted the new ones in, so we just use the original bushes in there. So now that I've got that, you can see the shaft there is sitting in, right, you can see the off center. That's how the action that turning as the trailing arm goes up and down and it acts on this shaft, you can see that it goes, because it's off center, it goes up and forward and backwards actually, and this is the piston. So if I locate that piston inside here, now this piston, it's not a particularly tight fit, it's just a loose fit in there. And I'm going to try and show this on the camera. Once it gets below a certain point, you should just be able to, so it's just slightly off. So now that can come forward and should just, sorry, it's hard to do it when you're not looking. Right, there you go. So now that's located there. You can see how that acts on the piston. So that can stay there now. And then this plug will get a new O-ring. So in the kit you've got the 2 gland seals, you've got the 3 smaller O-rings which go on each of these plugs here. And then you've got the 2 O-rings between the 2 bodies, 2 halves of the bodies, and you've got the O-ring that goes on this plug here. So that, obviously, when you're assembling this, just put on some brake fluid. Now these seals, one thing to mention at this point is that these seals are compatible with RR363 brake fluid. So not only are they EPDM, because we've witnessed that the quality of EPDM has changed over the years, and actually now it's very important that you use the right grade of EPDM, which is high in EMB. So these O-rings are all high EMB EPDM, and you can tell that because they've got this little yellow mark on them. The Prestige Parts ones have the yellow mark on them. That signifies that they're high EMB EPDM rubber. So obviously they're compatible with the brake fluid. So once that plugs in, it's a bit of a squeeze, but that plug in, and then that just sits in there, and the circuit goes in to retain that plug. Like I said, that's not a high pressure, this is just the low pressure section. Now, where obviously that shaft is in there now and it can't come out because the piston's in there, and it's not going to let the shaft go out. If you turn that piston too far to one side or the other, it will come all the way out, and then that's where, if you've got the spring pressure against that piston, it will push it past the point of no return. So now this gland has to then go in between the shaft and the housing, and it's quite a delicate gland, and I've got a pick that I've got kind of blunted off the end so it's nice and smooth and it's not going to damage it, and you can just start teasing it in basically, and you have to obviously be careful not to nick it, and it is a bit fiddly, so just take your time, make sure that you don't damage it. And then you can see that's now got that gland seal in between the shaft and the housing. One thing I forgot to mention actually, as well as the shaft corroding and pitting, you're likely to get pitting and corroding in the housing on the other side of that gland. Obviously that's also needs to be sealed, so if it's too far gone, if it's pitted, then you can't use this housing, that's a goner. But once you've got that seal in, as long as the shaft is good and the housing's good and you get the seal in, then you get this washer. It's like a seal retaining washer. It's got a kind of contour on the inside that lines up with the I'll just push the gland out. yeah, that lines up with the gland there, and then put your circlip back in. Always check that your circlip's seated properly by turning it in the groove, and then that's how it is. And you can do that both sides of the shaft. Then the plug that goes in the other end is the one with the shims. So it's got this nylon cap on it because that effectively goes up against this valve here. But that you fit the one of the small O-rings to this plug here, and so two of these have got the thick washers. One of them's got these shims. That's the one that goes in this end of the valve. Alright, that's that end now built. Once you've done the other side of the shaft. Right, now we're going to move on to the other half of the height control valve here. So we'll start with the high pressure out to the ram. For that you have this metal valve, okay, and you put that in with the thick shoulder down. So what I usually do is line it up on the pick and just drop it in, just make sure it drops down nicely, and then it's pretty obvious which setup of plug and spring you use for this side, because that seat's got a little hole the size of that spring in it. So we're just going to put the way I remember which way around these go is it's kind of obvious, because the lower one, the chamber that has the high pressure in, that has this nylon seat which takes this spring, and the cap has no nylon on it, so that's how it goes inside. The other one that takes this spring here, it goes like that, and that I've got put the O-ring on there, and that now screws up into there. Alright, so that's done, and that's the chamber that has this piston. Alright, you can feel that. I mean, obviously if there's corrosion and damage to that bore, then it's scrap. Like these, I think I said in the last video, these housings come matched to these pistons. You can't order them separately, and if they're gone, if they're damaged, then it's finished. So now the lower chamber. So yeah, it's got this lower seat, and what you can usually see on this valve is you can see reference marks on the inside of the housing where it seats. There's a couple of rings where it seats, and on the other side you can usually see what I assume is a little punch mark, so that when they assemble it first time in the factory, they drop the seat in there and put a drift down there and tap it so it seats. So when you put it in there, it's quite hard to get it to stay the way you drop it in, but you just got to line it up the right way around and make sure that's seated nicely there. And then this plug with the O-ring, and this spring, the skinny of the springs, drops in there. Alright, and then so the high pressure out to the ram, the upper chamber, takes this piston here. This little piston, it goes this way round. Okay, so the wasted part goes in first. I've taken these apart when they've been the wrong way around. Obviously it's not going to work properly. So that is now that half assembled. The O-rings that go in between the two sit in these grooves. You've got obviously, you can't get these the wrong way around, a big one and a small one. Sometimes it's a bit of a fiddle to get them to stay in the grooves, but you have to, sometimes it's better if you've got free hands, but so as you can see, those are in the grooves, and then this spring it will sit in the groove of that valve. I mean, some of them sit tighter than others, but so if you're holding it together, you've got to be careful not to drop out. And the idea is you just got to basically see that spring will push against that piston, and you have to. This is a point where you've got to be careful that a O-ring doesn't come adrift. So you've got to squeeze it shut and don't let it come out again. Don't let it come open again while you're putting it together. And then obviously put all your screws and nuts and washers on and torque it up. And that's pretty much it. There is a test. What you need to do is you need to supply high pressure in at this point. You need to have a gauge on this point here where it would supply the ram. You need to have the switching high pressure or return to this section, and you need to take the return from here. So we've got a jig set up, but I can't show you here because it's in the workshop. But yeah, it's the things to look out for on these is making sure that your return lines aren't blocked. So if your return lines are blocked, it's going to build up pressure in this chamber and obviously on the shaft as well. But that's it. I hope that helps people that are attempting to assemble them themselves. Happy to try and answer any questions. Also, we're going to do another video in the next week or so, which is going to be another hydraulic unit. So if there's anything anyone particularly would like to see, then please feel free to comment, and please subscribe so you get the next video. Thanks for watching.